And the importance of all of this, of course, is the deterrence of China, as you mentioned before. Albanese is going off to China early next month. You know, the key agenda will be lifting wine tariffs, but we've still got tariffs on other things like lobster and some beef. But you see on Friday, as I mentioned before, this 4-month-old report gets wheeled out on a Friday afternoon very quietly, hoping it doesn't get picked up in the news cycle, saying, well, we're going to leave the port of Darwin in Chinese hands. You can't help feeling that this is Australia ceding ground to China to suck up to them and say, please, sir, can you take away our tariffs? You know, why would we keep such an important asset in the hands of China, and why did they sit on that report for 4 months before releasing it?
Well, I think you're asking unanswerable questions. I think those are very, very fair questions. So since the report was completed, but before it was released, the Chinese released Zheng Lei, who never should have been in prison, and they lifted some of their outrageous trade coercive restrictions on Australia. At the same time, Mike Burgess, the head of ASIO, is at an American conference saying, in all of human history, we've never seen theft of intellectual property on the scale that the Chinese are doing. At the same time, the Chinese are ramming Philippines boats in Philippines waters in the South China Sea. Now, early on, the Albanese government spoke very frankly about China, and I applauded them for it. And it looked early on as though they were going to lead a real effort to get some firepower into the Australian Defence Force in the next 5 years. That was what the Defence Strategic Review was supposed to be all about. They said, we're doing it this way so we can move real fast. Now, since then, they've stopped criticising China publicly. China still has one of our citizens hostage. They had a report 4 months old which told them what the government wanted to hear, which is that they didn't have to disturb the Chinese-owned lease on the port of Darwin. And yet they didn't release that, but I'm sure the Chinese knew what the results of that report were. And it looks as though we have just become the psychological equivalent of the Afghan government. We just hope and pray that the Americans will always take care of our security. And that's about it. When you've said that, you've said everything. So Albo has inherited the traditional Australian playbook, which is we're great on symbolism, we're pretty feeble on substance, and he's not doing anything about it. And I tell you, it's a very bitter disappointment. And Richard Marles is already shaping up as one of the most unsuccessful and inconsequential defence ministers that we've seen in the last decade.
I agree, and it puts us in a pretty precarious position. Greg Sheridan, thank you so much for your time as always.